Now, I have to preface this by saying I have not seen The Mummy, and I have not read Death on the Nile.
Welcome to Keep It Fictional, a weekly podcast for book lovers by book lovers. Build your to-be-read list with Sadie, Liz, Virginia, Fiona, and Corrine from the Port Moody Public Library. Warning, this podcast contains strong opinions and may cause an increase in your library holds list.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Keep It Fictional from the Port Moody Public Library. In Canada, October is designated as Latin American Heritage Month. And this actually only started in 2018. And in the States, you may know this as the National Hispanic Heritage Month, which started off in sort of the mid-September to coincide with some of the Independence Days in several Latin American countries. This is the month that we highlight, acknowledge, promote, and celebrate the contributions of this community. And of course, being a book podcast, we are going to talk about and share the amazing work by Latin American authors living in the diaspora. Now, before we go to our books today, I just want to make a note that, of course, every time when we use these terms like Latin American, which we'll be using today in our book chat, we recognize the deficiency of any umbrella terms to represent those 21 different countries and territories that are involved. We're talking about many different and unique cultures and backgrounds, each with their own history, each with their own stories. So none of these terms are ever enough to describe them. And so we will always want to try to be as specific as we can and also respect how the author identified themselves as. So just want to make a note of that before we start. So we are going to go today with Sadie, and I hope you have something magic for us, because I feel like there are a lot of fantasies being written by Latin American authors. And even though I'm not a cover person, they always have really, really great covers that always make me think of you, whenever I see them. So what have you got today for us?
So yes, I do actually really love the cover of the book that I picked. It's not the reason I picked it, though. The reason I picked it, weirdly enough, is because it was being described and marketed as The Mummy meets Death on the Nile. Now, I have to preface this by saying I have not seen The Mummy, and I have not read Death on the Nile. But I'm so sorry. But just that combination and what I know just sort of instinctually about those two works of media, I feel like I've really shattered some people's world today, and I didn't expect that to happen. If I have time to ever watch a movie again, I promise you I will watch The Mummy. Now, is it just The Mummy number one? Or is it all the mummies? Well, no, I know there are more, but which one is worth watching is what I'm asking. Which one is worth watching? The first one. Okay. I will commit to the first one. Anyways, yes. So the combination of The Mummy versus Death on the Nile, it had the promise of something historical, something with some mystery to it, and yes, Virginia, just a very tiny hint of the supernatural. And that was exactly what I was looking for in a book to read. And so the author that I chose is Isabel Ibañez. And Isabel is a Bolivian-American writer. I believe this is actually her third novel. And it's actually not out until October 31st. So you have a little bit of a wait unless you can get an advanced reader copy of it, which is how I had the opportunity to read it. But this book and the cover, as I said, I really do quite like, is What the River Knows. The year is August 1884, and Inés Olivera is waiting to hear from her parents. She has, in fact, spent half of her life waiting for her parents. Ever since she was young, for about 6 months out of every year, her parents would leave her under the care of her aunt, Tia Lorena, and travel hundreds of miles away to Egypt. There, they would work with Inés's uncle, Tio Ricardo, helping him to discover and preserve the treasures of the Egyptian pharaohs. Now, for as long as Inés can remember, her parents' bags were always packed, and every time they left, it seemed harder and harder for her to keep the smile on her face as they said goodbye. Because her parents had always strictly forbade her from joining them. They always said that it was too dangerous for a proper young lady, and she was much better off to stay at home with her aunt and her cousins. This didn't stop Inez from learning everything that she could about ancient Egypt and the pharaohs. She even learned how to read hieroglyphics. And this was because she hoped that maybe one day her parents would see that she was ready to join them and finally invite her into this world that they loved, this world that they would go and live in for half of the year and leave her behind in Buenos Aires. Now, just a couple months shy of 19, Inez has finally once again decided to ask her parents if she can sail to Alexandria and finally be a part of this life. The last thing that she heard from either of her parents was about a month earlier, and her father had sent her a package. It's a bit strange. There was no note attached to it, and all that it had in it was a very small gold ring. It fit on her pinky finger, and when she put it on, she felt just the hum of magic. She saw the image of a woman very clearly in her mind, and she smelled roses. When she blinked her eyes, it all disappeared. But why had her father sent her a magic touched ring with no explanation? She really had no idea. She was aware of magic, everyone was, but she didn't really know why he had felt the need to send her this item. But regardless, she had kept it on her finger since she received it. So now her younger cousin, Elvira, has come to fetch her. And Inez is sure that she has finally received that letter from her parents, and she will finally get her answer. However, the letter that she does receive is not really what she was expecting. It's not from her parents. It's from her uncle, Tio Ricardo. "My dear Inez," it begins, "I hardly know where to begin. Your parents went missing in the desert and are presumed dead. We searched for weeks and found no trace of them." Just like that, Inez's whole world comes crashing down around her. Now, 3 months later, Inez stares up at the clear blue skies above the port of Alexandria. She has finally made it to Egypt. Dressing herself as a widow had allowed Inez to travel unaccompanied and, for the most part, unbothered. However, she is looking forward to finally meeting up with her uncle and leaving behind the seasickness that did accompany her for most of the trip. So when she disembarks at Alexandria, she is surprised that her uncle is not already waiting for her. 2 hours later, she is even more surprised that her uncle has not arrived yet. And she's even more surprised when she's approached by a young British man who claims to work for her uncle and not her uncle himself. However, the biggest shock comes when the British man, named Wyn Hayes, informs Inez that she will not be accompanying him back to Cairo to see her uncle. But she is, in fact, going to go back onto the same steamship that she just got off of and return to Buenos Aires. Inez is not too happy about this. She's determined to find out what has happened to her parents, and she's not willing to accept being told that she just has to turn around and go back home. She didn't sneak out of her aunt's house and travel across the ocean just to be sent back again. So, leaving the British man with her pile of luggage, Inez decides to make a break for it. She runs, losing the man in the crowds at the port, and she makes it to the train station and books her own passage to Cairo. However, when she gets there, she finally sees her uncle. His welcome is no more encouraging than that of his employee. He once again demands that she return home and forbids her from leaving the hotel until he finds her a proper chaperone to take her back. Inez is given her parents' usual room at the hotel, which still contains all of their belongings. As she waits in the room, fuming and stewing and trying to figure out some way that she can convince her uncle to let her stay and convince her uncle that she needs to be there so that she can figure out what happened to her parents, Inez finds a letter. It's tucked under her parents' bed, and it's from her mother. The letter expresses her mother's worry that her brother, Tio Ricardo, has become involved in a lot of dangerous criminal activity. Her mother fears for her safety. She fears for Inez's father's safety, and she fears for what is going to happen to Ricardo if he gets deeper and deeper into this criminal world. After seeing this letter, Inez refuses to accept her uncle's decision, and is now even more determined to find out what happened to her parents and to find out if her uncle was actually involved in their disappearance. So Inez decides to hide. She sneaks out of the hotel and she goes down to the port and she hides on her uncle's boat. Her uncle is planning on leaving the next morning to go to the dig site that they've been working on an island. And she knows that if she can just hide away on the boat for long enough, they will be too far away from land for him to send her home. However, the farther away from Cairo that they get, the more Inez starts to learn exactly what her uncle and his team are actually looking for. And she starts to worry that her life may also be in danger. And being stuck on an island with not a single person that she can trust may not have been the smartest idea that she's ever had. So as I said, well, I can't say if this book is actually The Mummy meets Death on the Nile. I can say that I really enjoyed it. Inez, as I said, she doesn't always make the best decisions, but she's a really fun, bold character who doesn't let anyone stand in the way of what she wants to do, which I always enjoy reading about a character like that. There's a lot of banter that goes on between her and Wynn, who is the man who works for her uncle. There's a little bit of romance that starts to occur between the two of them, which I always enjoy some romance. The mystery surrounding her parents' death is definitely the main focus of the story for Inez. However, Ibañez has included other conflicts and other kind of twists in the story that work to give it a bit more depth and just kind of to give it a bit more suspense, which I think she does a really good job of doing that. The only thing weirdly enough, the only thing I have to say that was a little bit strange was the inclusion of magic. It seemed like it did not play a huge part in the story. I was a bit confused as to why she put it in. Seemed like it was there just for the sake of there being magic and there being a supernatural element to it. And I don't know if the story would have worked as well just without having it there, which is a strange thing I know for me to say as a lover of the supernatural. But yeah, it didn't fit in with the story as seamlessly as I think it could. But I do think that if you are looking for sort of a historical mystery adventure with just like a tiny little bit of magic, tiny bit of romance, then I think that this is definitely a good book for you. If you enjoyed The Mummy and Death on the Nile, you might enjoy this one. It's hard to say because I can't say how similar they are. I'm so sorry, Corinne. But yeah, so that is What the River Knows by Isabel Ibañez.
I love how you just keep rubbing it in. Like, just keep reminding Corinne and everybody else that no, I have not seen that. And no, I have not read that. I don't know if Corinne could go next because I feel like she needs some time.
I'm really overwhelmed. like genuinely upset. And not like not at you because like everyone should be able to enjoy their media at their own time, but like those are like the corner like touchstones of my own personality and like life experience that just you managed to just like float right past them. How did you avoid The Mummy?
I don't honestly know. I feel like it came out at a time where maybe I was worried that it would be like too, I don't know, not scary, but like too something for me. I don't know. Maybe I was just in a I hate Brendan Fraser stage. I'm not sure. I'm sure I've gone through one of those at some point in my life. I saw George of the Jungle. He was good in that.
Well, Corinne, are you able to go next? Because I could go next.
Yeah, I don't even know if I can talk right now.
I figure you can. Okay. All right. Well, I'll go next then. My book is a novel that came out just a couple days ago. It is by a debut novelist, Raul Palma, who's a second-generation Cuban-American born and raised in Miami, Florida. So that's where he is going to bring us in his novel, but maybe a little bit different side of Miami that you might usually associate Miami with. This novel is called A Haunting in the Hialeah Gardens. And again, it is by Raul Palma. $68,173.15. This is how much Hugo owes. His debt started off as, he thinks, a couple $1,000. I can't remember. It was so many years ago. It's like a bill that he didn't pay and he just keep ignoring those notices and those phone calls. And he figured, it's so long time ago, statute of limitation, it will take care of itself. I don't have to worry about it. And then his wife got sick. She had cancer, she had to have surgery and lots of treatments, and the medical bills start piling up. When she passed away, the day after, right after she died, the collection agency called demanding payments, telling him that he now owes $68,173.15, an astronomical amount that there is no way that Hugo can ever pay off. This debt weighs him down day in and day out. It follows him like a shadow. There is no escape. One day, the collection agency called again to harass him. This time, it's from Alexis Ramirez. The lawyer is him and his company who has bought Hugo's debt. Think Saul Goodman from Breaking Bad. That's the kind of lawyer we're talking about. Advertises on bus benches. You see his face on billboards. He advertises on TV. To Hugo, Alexis is everything that is wrong about this country, everything that is working against him. Hugo started to yell at Alexis and told him off, saying that, what more do you want? I already have a monthly payment plan. That is all I can give you. I have nothing more for you. But Alexis stopped him and said, you know what? For once, I'm not calling you about your debt. I need your help. Hugo works as a babalayo in a local botanica in a strip mall. Apparently, he can call up the gods with a sacrifice and the gods will communicate and work through him. Now, Hugo remembers going in there just looking for a regular job per se, but his boss said that she saw a power in him, something special, and she hires him right on the spot and makes him the babalayo. No offense to his boss, but Hugo does not believe in any of this. Like, he knows where those so-called magical objects and amulets and potions came from. They are ordered online. They're made in some factories overseas. They are not magic. The trick, as Hugo has learned all these years, is that you have to listen to your clients, read between the lines, hear what's left unsaid, gather clues, find out their stories so that you can create some sort of like spectacle to make them believe that you have resolved their problems, that you have brought closure to them. And that is why Alexis called Hugo for help, because he believes that his house is haunted. Of course, Hugo has absolutely no interest in helping this guy, and Alexis knows that. So Alexis said, well, if you can help me cleanse my house, get rid of those spirits that is haunting me and my family, if you can just return peace back to us, then I will wipe your whole debt clean. All of it. Can he do that? Hugo is shocked. Apparently, there's people out there who has the power to just open up his file on his computer, tap a few keys, and that's it. The system will believe that he has repaid everything. This is an offer that Hugo cannot refuse, despite how much he despises this person. Because if that indeed is something that Alexis can do, then he will be free. So he figured he would just go do his usual, go to his house a few times, pretend to do some stuff and then listen to him, see what it is that is actually what he's hiding, what kind of story he has, and then figure that out and help him with that. But of course, it is not as easy and straightforward as you think. Raul Palma says that he tries to rewrite the story of debt. Often when we talk about people who are in debt, we say that is their own fault. They spend money they didn't have. They buy stuff they couldn't afford. They did it to themselves because they're irresponsible. They deserve it. But of course, nothing is ever that simple. There are many, many reasons why people accumulate debts. And Palma is here to show us that world, the systems, all the things that make sure that people who have nothing stay having nothing and the people who benefit from it. It is also a story about the cost of the American dream, a dream that has been sold to immigrants. Come to this land of opportunity, and as long as you work hard, then you and your family will be way better off here. This cost of immigration begins before Hugo came to America when he was 9 years old. And as Hugo starts to help Alexis with this alleged haunting, we learn more things that are haunting Hugo. It's not just his dad, but also his childhood in Bolivia, the life that he has before he came to America, the sacrifices that he and his family has to make so that he can get to America. It's also the guilt that he feels for his wife's death because he believes that he is the reason why she died. And the book takes a really sensitive but also really frank look at the role of a caregiver for the person who is caring for their family who is sick, fearing that you're going to lose your loved one, but at the same time also maybe some of those negative emotions, the resentment that you feel, the feeling like that you're the only one doing things and you don't feel appreciated and you're frustrated because you're taking everything on. And of course, the guilt that you have when you feel those negative emotions. There are, as the title suggested, there's definitely some supernatural elements in this, but I wouldn't call this a horror, but it's one of those books where it's a genre bender, and many of them these days are really good at taking those motifs from different genres and then do something different with it. And as one of the blurbs described this book, it has a book with a political heart. And I think that's a really, really apt description. So if you're looking for a book that describes an immigrant experience, and of course, there's never enough of them because every one of them is unique. You're looking for a good debut novel to add to your 2023 reading list. Check out A Haunting in the Hialeah Gardens, and it is by Raul Palma. All right, Miss Corinne, you calm down enough. Have you get over your shock or not? Are you ready, or do we need to do something different?
I think I can probably string a sentence together. Will I ever truly recover? No.
Well, and also just to let you know, I didn't say anything yesterday when you showed me the book that you were going to bring because I didn't want to give you any preconceived notions because that was the other book that I was going to read for this episode. But
really,
yeah. So because our Venn diagram, so I didn't want you to be like, oh, I don't want to read that now. So yeah. So what did you think of that book that you end up picking up?
Did you end up reading this, Virginia? I'm just curious.
Not yet. Not yet.
No? Okay. Well, bad news for you, good news for me. I loved this book. I really love this book. And I am not ashamed to say I cried multiple times. Not once, not twice, but 3 times in different parts of the book. Yeah. So what I really love about a challenge like this is that, and because I leave things to the very last minute, I usually have to take a very quick browse in our shelves. And that's kind of like the magic of the library, right? You never know what you're going to find. You never know what treasure is going to be there in the stacks. Or in this case, I limited myself to the new bookshelf because I have to read some more 2023 published books. And so I had 2 that I picked up, and Virginia didn't give anything away facial wise, but your eyebrow did kind of go up when you're like, isn't that about soccer? Which is a fair concern in that I don't care about soccer. But I'm happy to report it has very little to do with soccer. Almost nothing to do with soccer, actually. It does start with a soccer injury. In fact, this is kind of like a catalog of Gregorio's soccer injuries. Each of them has had a huge impact, both metaphorically and emotionally, and very much physically on his life. He is, again, lying in the hospital after someone's cleats puncture his lung in his disastrous run as a goalkeeper in a soccer game. As he thinks back to all of the horrible soccer injuries he has endured. One of the most serious ones being that when he was 18, he let his whole team down, as the goalkeeper. It all kind of rests on your shoulders. And in penalties, he was unable to bring his team to victory. 18, angry, but also very much in love. He's recovering from this injury, but he's also very much suspended because he wrote a long, involved love letter to his Spanish teacher, which no adult involved was impressed with. And so he has been gently suspended. At the same time, his parents are in the middle of a kind of very acrimonious divorce. His sister is estranged. And so his parents, in the process of selling their house, they decide, okay, we can't really handle you and all of your love emotions. So we're going to send you to go and live with your Uncle Nico. And his uncle Nico is quite a bit older. In all the reviews I read, he's described as defiant, but he's just like a lovely, grumpy old man doing his old man things in the way that he wants to do. But Nico is also dying. And so, as a graduation gift, Gregorio's parents give him and Nico 2 tickets to Colombia, where his parents grew up, where Nico grew up, where Gregorio really doesn't know or understand beyond the few things that his parents have said to them over the years. And as Nico explains to his young nephew, he says, it's not a vacation, it's a trip. And he takes him on this tour of the family ghosts. So they go back to Colombia, and Nico explains that this family has their own personal ghosts. He has his ghosts that he sees, his mother who died of a stroke, his sister who committed suicide, but also the ghosts of the country. So Colombia during the time of when Nico was there is a time of fear of war. He lost a girlfriend in a bombing. And it's a country kind of grappling with that history. And, you know, as an outsider growing up in America, Gregorio has never really understood that history or felt a part of it. And so this, not a vacation, but a trip through different kind of touchstones in his uncle's life kind of illuminates him as to his own ghosts that he's going to be inheriting, his own ghosts from his parents and their trauma, the ghosts of the people of his country that have passed and its history. And when he comes back and his uncle passes away, he kind of finds himself almost living like a ghost himself. He's adrift, he's young, he's not quite sure what he wants from life. His uncle has always said that he is an observer, a watcher. And so he gets a job at a museum as a place of history, and eventually starts a relationship with another, what are we going to call her? Magdalena, who is older, also a little adrift in her life, and comes from the Basque region of Spain. All this is kind of happening at the same time that Trump is coming to power, and that all these forces kind of internally clawing and picking each other to pieces are in the midst of kind of all of this. There's just kind of one man trying to find himself. What is his place in the world as a person? What is his place in the world as someone who is constantly accompanied by all of these ghosts? This is shockingly, and I really shockingly, I believe a debut novel by Rodrigo Restrepo Montoya, who describes himself as a Colombian-American writer living and working in Tucson, Arizona. It is The Holy Days of Gregorio Pasos. And yeah, I cried. I cried ugly at a couple of parts. I say it's shocking that it's a debut novel because it is so like masterfully written. The prose is so wonderful, and all of the imagery and the metaphors and the stories are all intertwined through this entire book, that he kind of plays it as masterfully as a xylophone player in a symphony. He's always hitting back to those same notes and going back to those same melodies that you heard at the beginning, but making them richer as you go further on. His command of writing is really beautiful, and he's able to kind of like succinctly sum up these huge ideas and these huge emotions in these like brutal 2 sentences. There is a wonderful part where Nico is kind of explaining, because Nico is Gregorio's window into being Colombian, and he says, to be Colombian is an act of faith, nothing more. For many people, that is enough. Most people have no choice. You don't know how little a person can have. I don't either, but I've seen it. I've met them. I've met their children. I've known their names. In Colombia, hungry parents give their children English names in hopes that someday their children will land ashore, a place where they can be happy. They name their children after Catholic saints and Spanish priests. That's what happens. Here, I live a life in broken English. Today, all I have to say is hello, goodbye, and good luck. That's how I stay silent. I have myself to talk to. Oh, it's so good. Yeah. I honestly kind of hope you pick it up, Virginia. I know that this is not really a you book in that it is this quiet, sentimental, warm coming of age story. It very much is kind of like that traditional Bildungsroman. But the writing is so good that you almost think he's doing something like he's inventing this entire genre in such a new way. I think it's a difficult book to recommend because if you're not the reader who's just willing to kind of like sit and marinate in some prose, on the surface of it, so little happens, but internally, so much happens. And the writing is so good. So if you are kind of willing to take a chance on a smaller, I should have saved this for the underappreciated novel episode, but that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. I committed to my bit. If you're someone who really just appreciates a masterful approach to writing and someone who just has built something with like thin layer upon thin layer of all this imagery and the writing, that by the end of it, it's a amazing masterpiece, like a painting with the different layers that you do, and finally you take a step back and realize what someone has achieved. I think you will absolutely love this book. So if you're looking for just like a beautifully written, quiet coming of age story that is going to make you like ugly cry, I'm going to say guaranteed twice. Guaranteed twice. For some people, third. I lost it on one of the lines. Again, this is a book that I think I'm going to have to buy and do my little highlighting on. And the final letter that Nico writes Gregorio, life goes on. It always does.
Thank you, Miss Corinne. Definitely will pick it up. Yeah, we'll let you know maybe this is the book. This is the book for 2023. Always going to be one. We'll find out. All right. Well, thank you so much. All right. So we're going to go to Al next and see what they have got for us.
Yeah. So what I have is definitely a tonal shift from what Corinne was talking about. I think I interpreted Latin American a little different because it seems like everyone else picked an author who is sort of hyphenated American, whereas I picked someone who is from Argentina, so in Latin America. I also would like to give a quick trigger warning for my review. I'm going to be mentioning animal death, and I'm going to be doing some description of human violence against humans. So Marcus works at a processing plant. He is fairly high up in the structure, and he is very good at his job. His job pays well, and he is able to take care of his aging father, who lives in an expensive nursing home. His wife and he are currently separated after the tragic death of their young son. He is very good at compartmentalizing and not letting the horror of his job get to him, which is good, because the product that he is in charge of making sure gets slaughtered and processed are humans. Tender is the Flesh is a dystopian novel by Argentinian author Agustina Bazterrica and the winner of Argentina's Clarin Novella Prize. In the world of this novel, a virus known as GBB, or just the animal virus, has infected every animal in the world, and it's lethal to humans who consume the meat of those animals or even get scratched or bitten by them. After an initial period of panic, where many animals were slaughtered, including pets, the meat industry began to lobby for one remaining source of meat to be legalized: humans. There had been some consumption of human meat even before its legalization. Poor people, undocumented immigrants, and other marginalized people were disappearing, and others were found to be eating them. In order to quell the chaos, governments around the world decided to legalize human meat, or as it's called in the novel, special meat, for breeding and consumption. Marcos's job and the world he lives in are horrific, and Bazterrica does not shy away from that horror. We meet a tanner who is rumored to have been a serial killer who kept the skins of his human victims before becoming a legal tanner. We see pregnant women with their arms and legs cut off so that they won't try and kill themselves and their unborn children while in captivity. We see a lodge where rich people take celebrities who have fallen into debt and hunt them for sport, with the agreement that if they can survive long enough, they'll have their debts forgiven. All of this is the new normal for Marcos. and he compartmentalizes it well. His compartmentalization comes under threat, however, when he comes home to find that he has been gifted a female head or human meat specimen to do with as he pleases. Private heads are a status symbol, and often rich people will keep live heads to eat slowly, keeping them alive as long as possible as they cut pieces off of them. Marcos, however, begins to develop an attraction to the woman he has been gifted. He names her Jasmine, and he eventually sleeps with her and impregnates her. This is very illegal in the society he lives in, and the punishment could be him being sent to the processing plant himself. This is a disturbing and graphic little novel, as I'm sure you figured out just from my brief description here. And the idea of human cannibalism is presented as the logical endpoint of a world that desensitizes itself to the suffering of animals in factory farms and cosmetics testing. Bazterrica writes with extreme clarity and force, forcing the reader to witness the horrors that the characters in the novel are desensitized to, asking the reader to consider whether it is something they can live with. The ending of the novel is the final hammer blow, and I won't spoil it, but I will say that the book is overall quite pessimistic about the capacity for people to empathize. I found the book quite compelling. The writing is very precise and does not let the reader look away from the horror of what is happening. There's an examination of many different facets of society: classism, capitalism, patriarchy. But the biggest question that lies under the text is, why not just become vegan in this situation? The answer is that the world and its structures will not permit it. Special meat is a luxury item, but meat is presented in this world as almost addictive, to the point that people who hang around the processing plant to eat whatever leftovers the plant will hand out to them are called scavengers, and they're just too poor to afford special meat. The elderly and the dead are often put on the black market as cheaper, lower quality meat that can be eaten by those unable to afford the premium special meat, to the point that funerals are no longer a societal thing that happen. The media advertises special meat to consumers and reports that animal protein is required for the human body to survive properly because it has all of the amino acids we need, that vegetables have hidden dangers, and etc. There are people who refrain from eating special meat, and there are protests against it, but these are presented as fairly small movements that don't have much force when measured against the governmental, media, and societal forces working to make special meat palatable to the general public. Bazterrica quite pointedly asks the reader with this book whether they are willing to turn a blind eye to the kinds of horrors that are already occurring, or whether they're willing to let things slide further. As an argument for veganism goes, it's definitely an interesting one. If you're looking to feel some sympathy for cattle going to market, or if you just want to read one of the more talked about dystopian novels of the last few years, or if you have a strong stomach and want to test that, I recommend picking up Agustina Bazterrica's Tender is the Flesh.
Thank you, Al. I am going to say, to add to that, because I think you help our readers really a lot, our listeners, you describe it in a way to help them understand what they're going to get themselves into. I think that's really important. Just to prepare everybody. But I also want to say it's really hard to describe a book about a subject like this and really, like, as you said in your blurb, that like it is really a lot more about just cannibalism. That is not about that at all. And I think it's hard to sell that to anyone because, like when you're describing like eating people, like it's really hard to describe, but there are like, I mean, there are cannibal books out there that involves this thing that's not really what the focus in, and it really uses that to point out some really big issues we should be dealing with, and like you said, that we often don't look at it, we just look away from it because it's too hard to deal with, So yeah, so I just want to give an extra plug for that book because I know it sounds like you're like, no, thank you. But, I'm glad that you made all those points to make sure that people know that this is not easy to read. But, I would also, like highly recommend it. It's not what you think. It's not what you think. Anyway, okay. So we have gone through 4 books. There's only 4 of us, but I thought we'll take this opportunity to maybe tell you just a few more books that, we want you to consider. And just books that we have on our radar or that we have read and love as we're looking for books for this topic. So Sadie, anything else that you want to recommend people?
Yeah, so just a handful of other authors, a few that I've talked about on the podcast. Isabel Ibañez, who wrote The Vampires of El Norte. Laura Namie Taylor, she wrote A Cuban Girl's Guide to Tea and Tomorrow, I think it was called. She just came out with the follow-up to that one as well, kind of YA romance. Gabrielle Romero Lucruz, who I have not read her book, but The Sun and the Void, which the description sounds really, really awesome. And I feel like that's another cover one, Virginia. That's a fantasy cover one that's just awesome. Anna Marie McLemore. I think I've talked about one, and then I recommended one to Fiona for the Fiona episode as well. So Blanca and Rojas, The Deepest Red. And then Aidan Thomas as well, who wrote Cemetery Boys, which I absolutely adored. I've read a couple of their other ones, which I didn't love quite as much as Cemetery Boys, but I'm really excited for the follow-up to that one. So yeah, just another few names to add to your list.
Some of the other Latin American authors that I really love, Samantha Schweblin, again, if you're wanting something that's sort of horror adjacent and really weird, but really compelling, highly recommend Samantha Schweblin. Fever Dream is exactly as the title describes. It is weird and wonderful. Virginia has mentioned on the podcast before Jorge Luis Borges, another Argentinian author, just fantastic, weird and wonderful writing. The Library of Babel, I think, is the title of one of his short stories, and it's one of my favorite short stories. It's just fantastic. Sadie has talked about Carlos Ruiz Zafón's Shadow of the Wind, which is also one of my favorite books. Highly recommend to anyone. And that whole series is fantastic. And for a Canadian-Mexican writer, there is Sylvia Morena Garcia. I was just like, I was going to talk about her, and then her name immediately left my brain.
Yes. I'm going to do a plug, although she doesn't need it because she's the best, for Elizabeth Acevedo. She does YA books in poetry, and I love them. I think she's a master at it. I believe she has 3 out: Clap When You Land, Poet X, the one about cooking. Poet X was a revelation and so, so good. Even if you think you don't like novels in verse, you will really enjoy this book. And don't let the kind of like YA label dissuade you. I think that she writes with astounding depth that is so appropriate for that audience and can be enjoyed by everyone. So I definitely want to plug for her. I'm going to mention another book that has haunted me ever since I read it. And I think it was maybe on my top books a little while ago. Carla, my writing is so bad. Cornejo Villavicencio, Undocumented Americans. So she was the author, one of the first undocumented to go to Harvard, and her book was searing and wonderful. And I still think about it years later. There are parts and passages of it that just haunt me. And then I wanted to, another YA book, Erica L. Sanchez's Not Your Perfect American Daughter. Yeah, that's it. Which was also quite wonderful and was published a couple of years ago. But that is one that such a fantastic main character and such a great story that really, really stuck with me. So yeah, those are my 3 picks that I would recommend.
Is Family Lore the adult novel, Elizabeth Acevedo? Is that also in verse?
I haven't read that one.
It just came out this year. In verse, no? Well, there's an other one. If people are like, I don't know, have a thing about YA, then
yeah, but read Poet X. Come on, it's so good. It's so good, and there needs to be, because there's no adult books in verse, which just kind of like
there
are so few of them though.
We did an episode on it. Go back to it and listen. Anyway. All right, so for me, I think I'm going to give another plug. And the book that I wanted to read was Dominicana, which is by Angie Cruz. She wrote one of my favorite novel of a couple years ago called How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water. I just love the character Kara, my favorite character of all times. There's a new book that came out by a Costa Rican author, Juan Manuel Arias, called Where There Was Fire. It's about like history, sort of like one of those Fiona book where you got like, multiple storylines and go back in history and back in time and and like multi-generational saga type thing about banana plantation. So this shows the history of that. So I'm looking forward to that. There's another one of my like favorite genre mashup, which is like sort of like the noir detective novel with science fiction. And so there's a book called Sham Shine Blind by Paz Pardo, which is about how Argentina has won the war by using like bottle up like emotions as weapons. So there's this like mystery about this new thing that is out there that is affecting people. So I'm looking forward to that. The other book, Sadie was talking about for Sun and Void, that one. That one, yes, that one I'm looking forward to. And there's also, I kind of mentioned it before, Son of Blood and Rune, which is by Marielle Lares. I started it. It's not I don't know what has to do with sorrow. Not that I know anything about sorrow, but apparently it's a sorrow retelling. But it's sort of like try to do like a story of that without being Eurocentric. And so that's what the author was trying to do. But it just introduced it's very early on, but it just introduced like a pirate, a handsome pirate, and you know where that's gonna go. And I'm like, I don't want to. So I may or may not continue. So yeah, not interested. But anyway, I'm sure the book is great for readers out there. So yeah, so those are just like many, many more books that you can discover at your local library. If you are looking for a specific book, if you're looking for a book by a specific background, like please do come in at the library, go to your local library. They can help suggest books from those 21 countries for you. So thank you again for joining us for Keep It Fictional. We will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. If you like our show, please tell a fellow book lover about it. You can find a list of all the books we discussed in our show notes. Join us next week for another fun book chat. Until then, keep it fictional.